Good evening. This is the March 1st, 2023 Seminole County Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. My name is Carissa Laham, chairman for tonight's meeting. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This board is a 7-member board appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. A quorum has been established to hold tonight's meeting. Public hearing items acted upon by this board are referred to the Board of County Commissioners for further consideration. Board members present tonight are Commissioner Carissa Laham, me, Commissioner Walter Grundorf, Commissioner Richard German is not present, actually, Commissioner Dan Lopez, Commissioner Mike Lorenz, and Commissioner Stephen Smith. Staff present.
Don't forget Tim.
I said him, I thought. Oh.
We have two Smiths.
Commissioner Tim Smith.
Here.
Staff present tonight are Mary Moskowitz, Planning and Development Manager, Paul Chipak, Deputy County Attorney, Desmond Morrell, Senior Assistant County Attorney, and Stacia Henry, Clerk to the P&Z Board. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the minutes have been approved. Next, we'll begin our work session. Item 1, we'll begin with opening comments presented by Planning Manager Mary Moskowitz.
I think Desmond's ready to go here, but just good evening, everyone. Again, for the record, Mary Moskowitz, Planning and Development Services Manager. I want to personally thank you all. You are a volunteer board, and we do appreciate the service that you do. Tonight, we're going to be, because it was such a light agenda, we decided to take this opportunity to do an annual work session and training. So you will be trained on ethics and sunshine law. Then we will go into some comprehensive plan and land development discussion. And then I will conclude this evening with some overview of Seminole County codes and just explain some of our policies that we have in Seminole County. We're hoping that each presentation will be about 20 minutes long, and then we'll get you out of here in about an hour. If you have any questions,
Who's going to run the timer?
You can definitely cut us off, Madam Chair. But this is, it is an informal group, so please feel free if you have questions, let us know. We're here for you tonight, so thank you. And with that, I'll hand it over to Desmond.
Sure. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mary. And good evening, board members. So you all will remember I started assisting you all about 3 months ago, so I have not presented you all with your standard ethics presentation. I'm sure Paul did a wonderful job last year, or if you've received this ethics training from, another agency within the state, this is an opportunity to just double down and kind of make sure that stuff sinks in. As Mary indicated, if you all have any questions at any point, please feel free to just pop a hand up and we can chat through this. My hope is that a lot of this stuff is familiar, but I know it can be, can be a bit cumbersome if this is your first time seeing it. So please don't feel bashful. If there's anything we can talk through, I'm happy to do so. So without any further delay, again, introducing myself, my name is Desmond Morrell. I serve as a senior assistant county attorney. I've been with the county for a little over 7 years now, and I've enjoyed all of my time here. I've presented this similar ethics presentation to several different boards throughout the county, so I think it's pretty foolproof at this point. So with that said, slide number 1. So the general tenets of the Sunshine Law. So the Sunshine Law has 4 basic requirements. Number 1, meetings must be open to the public. Number 2, there must be reasonable notice given for these meetings. And number 3, there must be written minutes taken at some point during the meeting. And if they're not written initially, they need to be written or typed at some point so that we can disseminate them as we see fit. And number 4, the public has a right to speak on all propositions except items that are ministerial or emergency matters in nature. And ministerial, just think about administrative items. We're not going to spend 10 minutes discussing why we staple on this side versus that side, why our agendas are in this font versus that font. That's kind of the ministerial stuff we're not going to take too much time on. And then, of course, emergency matters. We're balancing the safety and the protection of us versus what we give out to the public. So there's a line in the sand with how much information we want to give out as far as our safety, emergency protocol, blueprints, security measures, all of that good stuff. All right, so the Sunshine Law, who does it apply to and when is it triggered? So the Sunshine Law applies when 2 or more members of any particular board get together to discuss items that could foreseeably come before that board. So, you know, if Mike and Steven decide to get together and they want to have lunch, no issue with that. Only thing in the back of my mind as an attorney is I'm really going to hope Mike and Steven aren't talking about a future agenda item. Y'all can talk about, you know, the latest sports, weather, politics, well, maybe not politics, that's boring. Something a little more exciting and something that is a little more mainstream these days. You're more than welcome to chat about that. But if we, as the attorneys, find out that you all are discussing, you know, a potential development or something that's sure to come before you all, we will certainly caution you all from that because, as you know, all these discussions need to be out in the open, in the sunshine, so that the public knows what it is that you're contemplating and what you're considering for some of these matters.
Are we allowed to discuss things like nominations for vice chair?
Oof. I would say even that we should probably caution, I would caution you from any of those discussions, whether, you know, I'm sure there'll be merit-based, oh, we should consider this person for chair or that person for chair for this number of reasons. I would suggest that all of that should come out in the public, within the sunshine, because again, this is the business of your board. It's going to determine how the board is run, who's best fit to serve as chair or vice chair. So in an abundance of caution, I would say have those discussions up on the dais with an opportunity for the public to be aware so we can get the minutes and all of that good stuff. All right. So how expansive is the Sunshine Law? So we know that the Sunshine Law is going to apply to these sorts of meetings. Obviously, this is taking place in a public forum. This is at the Seminole County Chambers. But how about meetings that may take place via conference call, Zoom, or some other methodology? Well, if the statute allows for that to take place, we still need to ensure that we are abiding by all the Sunshine Law requirements. So if you'll recall, I wasn't working with you all during the COVID situation, but for our Board of County Commissioners, our Board of County Commissioners was allowed to conduct their meetings via Zoom or what's considered communicative media technology, you know, Zoom, Teams, conference call. So for us, what we wanted to do is ensure, one, that the public was able to dial in, whether it was a Zoom call, here's the link, public, this is how you can access the meeting. Do they have an opportunity to participate? Well, if we're having a closed conference call or something of that nature, it may be hard for the public to participate. So we want to ensure that there's a call in for them. And then lastly, we want to ensure that we're taking some sort of notes. Somebody's taking those minutes, recording what is taking place, and we're giving this public an opportunity to speak. So I think the best approach is to have these meetings open in these sorts of environments. But we know with emergencies, COVID, pandemics, hurricanes, that there's sometimes a need to pivot. So when we do pivot and when we are allowed to pivot, we still want to maintain the integrity of the Sunshine Law. So all those tenets we want to try to preserve.
And
Yes.
And I'd just say, that's loud, with the emails, you'll notice that when we send you an email, we do the BCC, so we try to make sure that we are blind copying everybody so that you don't accidentally do like the reply all and, send an email to everybody. So it's just something to keep in mind, even if you are sending an email amongst yourself, that could still be considered, part of the sunshine, so.
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you for adding that, Mary. And Mary's a little ahead of me, so maybe I can get through my presentation.
Oh, look at that. Okay, never mind.
All right, so continuing on with that, the use of non-members. I want to caution you all from using non-members as conduits. So, if Tim and Dan, they have a mutual friend, we don't want Tim sending messages to the friend saying, hey, make sure Dan gets this info before the particular meeting, because again, it's essentially you two talking. We want this to be out in the open, so the public has an opportunity. We don't want these, back channels of information floating through, because again, you're essentially just, that third party is essentially serving as a conduit to the discussion, to the messaging that you all are having. So we want to refrain from that. All right. In addition to conduits, it's important to realize that staff and other non-members should refrain from asking the board members to provide information to other board members by polling them. So, for example, if our chair wants to send out information, say you all are considering, I don't know, the chair and vice chair, since she asked that earlier. If she wants to send out bios of the individuals who are being considered for the chair and the vice chair, perfectly fine. What we don't want to happen is for her to send out those bios and give all of you an opportunity to make your comments and, give your pros and cons and then send it back out. Because again, you're having those discussions, you're contemplating, evaluating these potential choices, but that's board action. So we want to make sure that that takes place up on the dais with an opportunity for everyone to be heard. There's no ban on circulating information in anticipation of the meetings, whether they're reports, biographies, resumes, anything to kind of save time so you don't have to take the 10 to 20 minutes at the board meeting to read that. Perfectly fine. Just want to be cautious that we're not exchanging ideas or comments or polling. Hey, what do you think about this? Floating this by. What do you give me your 2 cents on that. We don't want to do that. Simply sharing the information so everybody has a chance to read it and become familiar with it, no issue. But when you're exchanging ideas and evaluating and analyzing, then we're starting to get into some murky water. So please be cognizant of that. And this is essentially what I just said. Written reports being circulated are allowed. Just be cautious not to comment on them and kind of pass that through you all. Board members may not engage in exchange or discussion of matters on Facebook or social media that may foreseeably come before the board for action. So, again, I'm going to keep using this example because there was just so much going on. But during the height of COVID, when a lot of us were working virtually, I know that the county's Facebook page was extremely busy. We would utilize that page to disseminate our emergency orders, to give best practices as far as fighting and addressing COVID, providing the citizens with updates as far as our public facilities, what's open, what's closed, what protocol we're taking. But what I would hate to see is that on that timeline somewhere, on those message posts, I would hate to see our commissioners going back and forth. Here's District 4 chiming in, hey, this is how we're doing over here. And here's District 3, well, hey, how did you all, get such low numbers for COVID? Or what are you all doing to, disseminate vaccine or information or the latest numbers? All of that taking place on Facebook or on an electronic database or some other server is a direct violation of the Sunshine Law. Because again, COVID, the county's response, what we're doing to address that is county business that could foreseeably come before that board. So we don't want that robust discussion or some of this analysis to take place on a Facebook wall. We want this stuff up here so that, we have an opportunity for it to be recorded, we get the minutes, and we get that robust discussion and input from the public. I don't think that's going to take place on a Facebook message board. Excuse me. Public access to meetings is one of the key elements of the Sunshine Law, and board members are advised to avoid holding meetings in places that are not easily accessible to the public, which is why we always encourage them. If we can have them at our public facilities, we're all for that. Easily accessible, you kind of know where they are. They don't give any kind of cold or chilling effect. I mean, this is as open as you're going to get. Look at all these seats. You got the double doors. It's the Seminole County flag waving up front. Seems pretty inviting and open, as opposed to if we were to have these meetings, I don't know, in the back of Ruth's Chris Steakhouse or somewhere at, I don't know, Willow Tree in the corner somewhere. You might feel like, oh, I got to buy my pint of beer or got to buy my big T-bone steak in order to participate. No, we want to ensure that individuals or members of the public can come out, they can participate, they don't feel that they have to pay money for this restaurant or that they have to dress all fancy. Come as you are, have the ability to participate in your local government, and that's what we want to promote. So I'm always encouraging that we have our meetings in these public facilities, if we can, at our board, at our chambers, or other such facilities. And so what does it mean for our meetings to be open to the public? Does this mean that we have to make sure that we have buses to bus people in? Do we have to ensure that we're accommodating individuals who may not have transportation or may have some other issues? Not necessarily, but what we do want to ensure is that if individuals want to come, that they have a place that they can come and meet. We have seats here, we have ample lighting, we have an audio system so people can hear and participate. Gives all the check marks to allow somebody to participate in the meeting if that's what they want to do. So again, open to the public simply means that it needs to be able to accommodate the public. It doesn't mean that we have to make sure that we have transportation for them. We don't have to walk every, senior citizen in, we just have to ensure that there is a place, that it is open, and if they want to sit or participate somehow, that they can. All right, so a couple of frequently asked questions, and I'll go through these pretty quickly so we can stay on time. Number one, written minutes. So you'll see that oftentimes our meetings are recorded. You see the cameras all around, and I think that's a great tool for members of the public. But our clerk also makes sure that all of these meetings, not only are they recorded, but at some point they type out the minutes. So if somebody wants to request them, they can simply pick them up, read, and see what took place there. One of the one of the oldest and most standard practices for public meetings. Number two, are board members authorized to abstain from voting? My take is generally no. You all have been appointed to these positions to make the tough decisions. We would hate for you all to be sitting in these chairs month in and month out and abstain from every other vote simply because you have cold feet. I know sometimes it's tough decisions. I know sometimes there's the threat of an appeal or sometimes the media may be present, but you all volunteered and have been appointed to this position to serve. So that's what we ask of you all, to serve and put your best foot forward. Now, there are going to be circumstances where you're going to want to abstain, whether there's a particular conflict, whether you think you could prejudice that individual by participating, by voting. We want to make sure that we're refraining in those situations. If ever you have a question where you think there may be a conflict, you're not too sure, more than welcome to consult with us, the county attorney's office. That's what we're here for. But a lot of times, those conflicts will be very glaring. Either you know the developer, you stand to gain some sort of monetary benefit or loss as a result of your vote. Those are oftentimes going to trigger what's a conflict and what is not. And this is just a caveat. This doesn't happen too often, but if an item is continued to a future meeting, we want to make sure that we notice that continuance. We want to make sure that, okay, everybody showed up on, February the 28th because they thought this item was going to be heard. Well, we heard some of it, but it had to be continued to, I don't know, the second meeting in March or something. So we want to make sure that the public is aware because, again, we want to maintain those Sunshine Law tenants. We want to make sure that the public knows that this is going on. We want to make sure that they have an opportunity to participate because, again, we are serving at the will of the community. If we're just doing this, in the back room somewhere, in an alley, in a not so open environment, then there's clearly some concern with what it is that the government is doing. So we want to make sure we're as transparent as possible. I know that's not going to be an issue for us. I think a lot of that is just ingrained in us, and we do have the safeguards to ensure that we're compliant. A couple of other items. Does the Sunshine Law restrict the board from taking action on matters not on the agenda? Quick answer to that is no. The chair does have the ability to bring up new business, new items that she would like for you all to consider. Perfectly fair game. Number two, may a member of the public tape record a board meeting? It's always kind of awkward, but the short of it is yes. I mean, sometimes you'll see members of the media here to get their sound bite or video clip. Absolutely welcome to do that. Again, we're doing this in the most transparent manner possible, so shouldn't surprise you if you see a few videos here and there, a few pictures. I mean, you guys are local celebrities, so, you know. Number three, does the Sunshine Law apply to one board member meeting with one member of a different board? The answer to that is no, because again, what we want to ensure is that any of the business of this particular board isn't discussed, you know, at that Ruth's Chris dinner, or, you know, at the back of Hollerback, or some other entity. If, you know, Walter is getting together with one of our, I don't know, a member of the Board of Adjustments, similar board to you all, but they don't have the, you guys don't consider the same business. So anything that could foreseeably come before Walter probably will not come before that Board of Adjustments. So you all can kind of see that separation and why there's not that direct issue. Now, I would be a little concerned if Walter and Stephen were getting together. Again, same example I was using before. Don't want you all to discuss an item that could foreseeably come before this board. We want those discussions to be, again, open in the sunshine. All right. Let's see. So penalties. Obviously, you all will be on the straight and narrow. We're not going to worry about any penalties because we know no violations are going to take place. But in order to scare you and to really ensure that you refrain from crossing that line, here are some of the penalties. So there are going to be civil penalties up to a $500 fine for the participating member. It is important to know that a knowing or intentional act is not required. So, you know, if Stephen and Mike just got real comfortable at, you know, whatever sports bar, and it went from discussing the NFL to all of a sudden discussing the, you know, this new development, that could be an issue. And of course, you all didn't intend to do that, but the conversation just got you there. Well, it doesn't matter. A violation is a violation, and there's a potential for that fine. Now, criminal penalties that may be associated. So, fortunately, we don't see this too often in Central Florida. I think our politicians are pretty good around here. They kind of stick to the straight and narrow for the most part. But for whatever reason, down in South Florida, we see some of these violations, and we've seen some of their elected officials and appointed officials end up in jail for some of these violations. And it's important for you all to realize that that is a potential penalty. I mean, we don't see it very often. Oftentimes, these are resolved with some sort of fine, some sort of injunction. But, you know, based on the severity of it, you know, a court could, in fact, fine for a criminal infraction. So just be mindful of that.
Is there an opportunity in those cases for civil litigation to come out of it as well?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. So I think that that would probably be the first step. So for one, let's see what we can do to try to cure the situation. Oftentimes you're met with several demand letters, and you're aware of what the potential violation is, and we know what the potential consequences are. So let's see if we can kumbaya and figure out how to resolve this, whether it's, you know, I don't know, curing whatever issue, and it's all fact specific, but generally, yes, there's going to be oftentimes a lot of pre-litigation, and then ultimately actual litigation, which could see its way all the way through trial. Knock on wood, but fortunately we haven't had that situation here, so hopefully it doesn't happen, because that means we wouldn't be too experienced in defending that, but the good thing is we've never had to, so that means we do a good job of preventing it, so. Moving along. All right. So again, going forward with those violations. So what happens if the Sunshine Law was violated, but there were still decisions made at that particular meeting? Well, any decision that was made that was in which the Sunshine Law was not followed, all those decisions become void. So, I mean, if somebody's making decisions in the Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and then the minutes come out and we see that it took place here, nobody knew what was happening, but all these decisions were made, and the chair would like for them to be, noteworthy and have the full-on authority that it should, I'm sure there will be a ton of people from the public saying, we didn't even know this meeting existed. I didn't have an opportunity for public input. What do we do with all this? And the judiciary has determined that any of those types of violations, it voids that whole meeting, all of those decisions that were made. And so, from my takeaway, it's of everyone's best interest, don't even waste your time, because even those meetings that you might try to hold that are not sunshine compliant, it's all for naught, because none of that stuff will stick. So just something to think of. Of course, violations could be referred to the state attorney, which is the criminal prosecutor, for consideration. Okay, moving along to public records. So public records are codified in Chapter 119 of the Florida statutes. And again, the idea here is that we want to ensure transparency. We want to ensure that our residents, that our members of the public have an opportunity to review any public records that we may have. So what is a public record? Public record has been defined as any document, paper, letter, map, book, tape, photograph, film, sound recording, data processing software, or other material, regardless of physical form, characteristic, or means of transmission, made or received pursuant to law or ordinance, or in connection with the transaction of official business by any agency. I know that's kind of a mouthful, so the way I always think of it, any item, regardless of form, whether it's a paper, whether it's a recording, if it's being used to perpetuate, communicate, or formalize the business of this board, then that is, in fact, a public record. So, those minutes, oftentimes notes, decisions, if people are submitting stuff into evidence, oftentimes all of those become public records. Now, there are some nuances when we're talking about litigation or some other sensitive matters. There may be a nuance such as, this remains protected until litigation is over. This remains protected until the audit is completed. This remains protected until the internal investigation is over. But generally, I like to think of anything that we do that is communicating, perpetuating, or formalizing business, just think of it as a public record, Maybe it's not, if we can find an exception, but generally it's going to be. So you should have in the back of your mind, anything you reduce to writing or that becomes somewhat permanent or memorialized, it's probably going to be a public record, which means it's subject to public disclosure. So if you don't want it on the front of the Orlando Sentinel, careful what you put in there. They always have a knack to find the, some of the most embarrassing stuff, so we certainly want to be mindful. I'll just read this. Oh, yes. So it's impossible to lay down a definition of general application that identifies all items subject to disclosure under the Public Records Act. And as I've alluded to, some of these are going to be a case-by-case basis. The good thing about public records requests is that we generally receive the request directly. We have an opportunity to ensure that we understand the request, so I can ask the question, now, did you mean this when you made this request? Now, was it in these dates that you were looking for? Was it a particular individual's notes or emails that you were looking for? That allows us to narrow it down so that we can focus in on what it is that they're requesting, and that we try to provide it to them as quickly as possible. These are some examples of public records that are subject to release. Computer records, email messages, text messages, Facebook messages, financial records, some litigation records, and personnel records. Now, of course, the important thing to realize is these only become public records when they perpetuate, communicate, or formalize county business. If Mike and Stephen are simply planning for, Stephen's future birthday, that's fine. They may be exchanging a series of emails, and it's just about Stephen's birthday. Although we all care about your birthday, Steve, that's not public business, you know what I mean? So if somebody wants to make that request and they want to see all the emails between these two pertaining to the Planning and Zoning Board, I'll be the first one to say, all these birthday messages, they're not relevant. It's not county business. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Got a question?
Yes, sir.
But you do have access to make that decision.
Correct.
To our records is what?
Correct. So, and that's the thing,
Pretty
even
clear.
with text messages. So if you all are utilizing text messages to exchange information, I think a text message is okay if the chair wants to send out a reminder and say, hey, reminder all, we have a meeting tonight at 6:30, it's going to be at the board chambers, period. I would hate for any of y'all to respond back and start engaging in discussion, but a simple message to everyone should be fine. If somebody challenges that and they say, oh, that is a public record, and we want to see what all they have, well, there may be an argument that the chair would have to turn over her phone so we can see whether or not that's the only text message. If it is, great, but somebody's going to have to do the scrolling to ensure that, you aren't sending any others. So I always like to tell people, please refrain from the text messages if you can. Use that county email address. I think you all have county email addresses. If not, okay, just use whatever I would suggest make your own email address specifically for this board. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. Just ensure that when you are sending those emails and stuff, it's specifically to board pertaining to board matters or board information. I hate to give that spiel. I hate to remind folks that if you're engaging in text messages from your private cell phone, if they're still perpetuating, formalizing, and communicating public business, and they're still a public record, which means I'm going to have to go through your phone. I don't necessarily want to, but I got to make sure that if somebody's requesting all those communications, that we get them to them, or that I can at least say, legitimately that, hey, I know you think that these were public records. These were not because, I don't know, they weren't discussing public business, or they're exempt based on these statutory reasons. Okay? So please keep that in mind. I say no text messages. I understand that's not as realistic in 2023. So I say, hey, if you can email, do the email. But even better, if you can just pick up the phone. There's really no record of that. All we can see is that a phone call was made. I don't know the discussion that took place. There's nothing that memorialized that. I just know that the phone was picked up and it seems like a communication happened. There's not much I can do with that. And that's not to say we're trying to hide anything or keep anything buried, but talk to your colleagues. Why does everything have to be an email? Build that rapport, build that relationship. But moreover, I find that communication can be a lot more, can go a lot quicker that way. All right, speed this up a little bit. Okay. Penalties for violating public records laws. Generally, there are civil and criminal penalties associated. The civil penalties will look like a fine, up to $500 per instance. Criminal penalties, up to a first-degree misdemeanor, which could result in up to 1 year in jail, $1,000 fine, or up to 12 months probation. I don't think that's going to happen to anybody, but I'm here to just warn you that that could happen. So stay on our P's and Q's. Again, we do a good job of keeping our board members, on the straight and narrow. So I'm not too concerned about that, but it is important for you all to realize that that's the other end if we don't comply. This is the last portion. Chapter 112 goes over the ethics of our board members. So this applies to all of our local officials. It applies to me, it applies to Mary, Paul, and it applies to you all. You all may, work in the private sector on your day-to-day, but in this capacity, you are public servants and public officials. So Chapter 112 does apply to you, and that's going to go over the solicitation and acceptance of gifts, doing business with one's agency, any unauthorized compensation, the misuse of one's position, conflicting employment, disclosure of certain information. Voting conflicts. So we mentioned it before. The expectation is that all of you that are serving on this board are there to vote on these matters. You've been appointed to do so. There's been some level of trust placed in your abilities, your critical thinking, your background, and your knowledge. And so we want you all to impart that wisdom and make these decisions. If there is a potential conflict, again, when you stand to gain some sort of financial gain or loss as a result of voting, if you are going to prejudice the individual, the applicant, or the respondent for that matter, you may want to refrain as well. If there are any questions or you're kind of concerned, call one of us, email one of us. Happy to sit down and go through the facts and kind of talk through that to determine whether or not there is a conflict. And there's no shame in that. If you're just unsure, I'd rather you err on the side of caution. All right, so factors to consider when we're talking about whether or not there's a gain or a loss as a result of that vote, and these are some of the things that I consider when determining whether or not a voting conflict takes place. One, we want to look at the size of the class that is affected by the vote. Two, we want to look at the nature of the interest involved. Three, we want to look at the degree to which the interest of all members of the class are affected by vote. And four, the degree to which the officer, his or her relative, business associate, or principal receives a greater benefit or harm when compared. So essentially, you want to see, is this an actual gain or loss, or is this so speculative, is this so down the road that it may not ever occur? So if we're voting on something and Dan's cousin's best friend could benefit from it, that's pretty far down the road. I don't think that's a conflict for you, Dan. However, if you and your you stand to gain something from that, if your business or place of employment is now going to be receiving more funds, if those funds potentially could trickle down and result in a bonus or some sort of raise for you, then yeah, we can see where that could be an issue. So please be mindful of that. Oftentimes you'll know when that conflict is there. It'll be so glaring. But again, I'm happy to walk through any issues if need be. Oh, and that's it. Awesome. I always love when I surprise myself. I just get to talking. But with that said, are there any questions? I know we went through three major topics pretty quickly. We went over the public records, we went over the Sunshine Law, and we generally discussed ethics and voting conflicts. But if you all don't have any questions, I will gladly pass this presentation on over to Mr. Paul or Miss Mary. But again, please, my email is on here. If you have any questions that relate to this, don't feel shy. I'm happy to talk through them. I'd rather do that than work on the other end. We're trying to get you out of a jam. All right? So
Thank you.
best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a little evil laugh there.
Item number 3, overview of comprehensive planning and zoning by Paul Chipok.
Good evening. For the record, Paul Chipok, Deputy County Attorney, and give you a quick overview of comprehensive planning and zoning.
You did it. There you go. I might have to,
Which button?
oh, I think I have to click, let me see. Okay.
That one? Okay. Okay, very quickly, we'll cover first comprehensive planning, then zoning, then due process and quasi-judicial hearings, considerations when you're making a decision, and then if you have any questions. But feel free, if you have any questions during the presentation, to just stop and ask me. Okay. First, comprehensive planning, Chapter 163 of the Florida Statutes, Part 2, is referred to as the Community Planning Act. It requires that a local government to adopt and amend its comprehensive plan to guide future development and growth. Amendments to the comprehensive plan by a local government is a legislative action. Legislative actions result in the formulation of a general rule or policy, whereas judicial actions or quasi-judicial actions are the application of that general rule of policy to a particular situation. This is a picture of our future land use map. Basically, you see the perimeters of the county, and you see various colors on the map, and those colors represent the various types of land use designations, such as low-density residential, medium-density residential, high-density residential, commercial, industrial, and also parks and
PLI.
public
lands
lands.
and institutional.
Yes. So that's what it looks like. Conceptually, picture it like a chest of drawers. The outside of the chest of drawers is the boundaries of the county, and each one of the drawers itself is the type of land use designation. There's the current amendment process. A municipality must transmit proposed comprehensive plan amendments to the State Land Planning Agency based on the type of amendment. There's three types. There's the small-scale amendment process, the expedited state review process, and the state coordinated review process. The small-scale amendment process in the last several years has been amended. It used to be limited to up to only 10 acres. Now it's up to 50 acres. So for this board, most of the comprehensive plan amendments you will see will be small-scale amendments. And they only require the one adoption public hearing, and that can be done concurrently with the rezoning action. The expedited review process requires two public hearings. One is the transmittal hearing, and then from the transmittal hearing, it's transmitted up to the State Department of Economic Opportunity. They have 30 days to review and comment, and also other state agencies have the ability to review and comment and give their comments to DEO. And then those comments are sent back, and the state is limited to only commenting on important state resources and facilities. So the powers of the state in reviewing comprehensive plan amendments has severely been restricted over the last several years. So it's a lot less intense than it used to be. And then when we get the comments back, then there is the adoption hearing, and that has to be occurring within 180 days from receiving the comments. This is a chart showing the flow chart of what the amendment process is from the proposed phase or transmittal phase and then the adoption phase. And that is located on the DEO website if anybody's interested in more detail on that. The state coordinated process is limited to larger projects and also the evaluation and appraisal reports. And you'll be seeing that next year?
Yes, November.
November. So you will be seeing the ear-based amendments coming before you. Well, actually, we'll do the ear report. You'll review that. That gets sent to DE.
We did that.
We did that?
Yes.
So we're actually doing the amendments coming back?
Yes.
Okay, the amendments will be coming back. I should talk to Mary more often. Okay. Basically, it's the same process as the expedited process, but rather than just 30 days for the state to review and comment, the agencies have 30 days to review and comment, and then give their comments to DEO, and then DEO has an additional 30 days to prepare its report and send it back to us. And then after that, after we adopt, then the adoption of the State Land Planning Agency issues a notice of intent to find compliance or not in compliance within 45 days. And again, this is the flow chart for the state coordinated process, and again, that is online under the Department of Environmental Opportunity if you're more interested in that. Again, comprehensive planning is the overall big concepts of where things should generally go in the county. The next phase is zoning. And zoning is defined as a division of a municipality or a county into districts and regulation of building and structures according to their structure and nature. It's an exercise of discretionary power by the local government. The zoning must be consistent with the comprehensive plan, and a zoning that is not in accordance with the comprehensive plan is ultra vires, meaning no good and void. The application of zoning regulations to a parcel is considered a quasi-judicial action. And the types of quasi-judicial actions that apply to specific property to the development applications. The types that you see are the specific rezoning applications, variances, which are covered by the BOA, special exceptions, which you guys see, and then goes to the Board of County Commissioners, and also annexations. This is a representative map of a zoning map. Looks very much like the comprehensive plan map, but it's on a smaller scale and more specific to the types of zoning classifications. Again, getting back to the chest of drawers, you have the perimeter of the county. You have each drawer which is a future land use designation. You open the drawer, and then you have your specific rezonings in there. So, assuming all the sweaters are types of commercial uses, they all fit within the commercial future land use designation, and the commercial zonings are all compatible with one another and fit within the commercial land use designation and are compatible with each other.
Paul, I've seen part of this presentation before, and I've always wondered, is this how you keep your drawers at home, very neat?
No, not quite. We also have the future land use planning and zoning table, and part of that table is listing out the future land use designations and then listing which which zoning districts fit within the comprehensive plan designations. Moving on to quasi-judicial hearings. That is the majority of what you do. And due process is required, and what processes do. The quasi-judicial proceeding is not controlled by strict rules of evidence and procedure. However, we must adhere to certain basic standards of fairness to afford due process. Minimum due process requirements, basically 3 rules. Must provide notice of the hearing, must provide an opportunity to be heard, and parties must be able to present evidence, cross-examine witnesses, and be informed of all the facts upon which the commission acts. In regards to cross-examining witnesses, we are not that formal, so it's not like a court, but the applicant does have the right to question witnesses if there are any, and it would usually be handled through questions to the chair, and then the chair would designate and request that the appropriate person answer the question. There's also a distinction between whether a person is a party or just a general member of the public. The public may address the commission, but a party is entitled to participate in the proceeding specifically. Determination of a party is done by the interest that the individual has in the proceeding. The applicant and/or property owner of the land at issue is typically deemed a party. And there are standards, but again, if you're the applicant or the property owner in a particular rezoning, for our purposes, you're deemed a party. Generally, everybody else is deemed a member of the public. And why is that important? Because the party, under due process, has the ability to present evidence, cross-examine witnesses, and also be informed of all the facts upon which the commission is acting. The public, Florida law does not require the participants to cross-examine witnesses, and the time for the public comment may be limited. And again, you're all familiar with the 3-minute rule that we generally apply in when there's a lot of public comment, and that case law substantiates that, and we are allowed to do that.
Is the 3-minute rule case law that's like statewide, or is it a Seminole County specific amount of allotted time?
3 minutes is a county-specific rule. Case law does support that you can limit the amount of time a person acts on. A lot of the jurisdictions do utilize 3 minutes. Some are 2, some are 5, but again, 3 minutes is very quick, but sometimes it is also a lifetime, depending on the situation.
Did we ever determine if there's any kind of like real definition of what group is allowed to have 6 minutes? Does it have to be an HOA or any kind of loose group?
From our, and again, that's a local rule. We define it, thinking off the top of my head
I
here.
remember we discussed it maybe a
If
couple of
you're-
years ago now, but
Right, it's supposed to be an organization, like a nonprofit organization that has an interest in the subject matter, or an HOA, which typically are nonprofit organizations, or other organizations that have an interest in land use and development.
okay.
So, again, I can get back with you on a more specific answer on that.
And I would say, too, the reason for the 6 minutes is that it's supposed to be representing the groups. So if it's an HOA, and so you have the 6 minutes for the HOA president, then you wouldn't, a representative, you wouldn't allow other members of that
Right.
community then to also speak, because they...
We haven't had the issue in a while. I
Yeah.
just remember it had come up before, and I wasn't sure we ever got a really clear definition.
Right. Like I said, typically, if it's a 501c3 nonprofit organization with the general purpose of promoting natural lands or something like that, that's typically what we consider acceptable. Making a decision. The council is the trier of fact and to weigh the evidence. And again, you are appointed as an advisory board to the Board of County Commissioners, so you are doing the same thing. You're weighing the evidence as presented to you, giving that the various evidence weight, and then making a determination based on that evidence presented before you. In an appeal, and then the Board of County Commissioners considers your recommendation, but if there is an appeal or a recommendation situation, they hear the evidence presented to them and then make a decision based on that evidence. The circuit court, if the decision is appealed, functions as an appeal court and is not entitled to reweigh that evidence or substitute its judgment for that of the county commission. Whether the record contains competent substantial evidence that would support some other results other than that which the county commission determined is irrelevant. Again, there could be conflicting competent substantial evidence. That's why you are the trier of fact and the Board of County Commissioners is trier of fact. To ferret through that and use your discretion and best judgment with interpreting the policies that we have in the comprehensive plan and looking at substantial compliance with those regulations, and also whether the particular rezoning is compatible with the surrounding community. So there's a myriad of factors that go into that decision. And then various types of decisions. Going with special exceptions, it's a function of the Planning and Zoning Commission to make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners for final action. That is a duty that is new to you for just a couple of years now. It used to be part of the Zoning Commission, the Board of Adjustments, but now that function has been turned over to this board. The initial burden is on the applicant to establish compliance with the criteria, and then the burden shifts to the local government to establish that the use does not meet the criteria or is adverse to the public interest. The special exception criteria, in general, it's not to be detrimental to the character of the area. It's not to have unduly adverse effect on existing traffic patterns, movements, or volumes. It's to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. It must meet any additional requirements specific in the code. Some of our special exceptions do have listed additional criteria that they have to meet, and then it will not be adverse to the public interest. Moving on to variances, just for your information, it is a function of the Board of Adjustment. An exemption is granted from certain land development regulations where, owing to the special conditions, the literal enforcement would result in the unnecessary or undue hardship. Variances cannot be granted to permit a use that would otherwise not be permitted in the particular zoning category involved. There are criteria for the variance to be granted. You can see them. I'll just skip over that. But again, the most important one of those is that it has to be based on some type of hardship due to a factor that's not created by the applicant. So going back to rezoning, again, assuming that the pair of socks is a rezoning, say it's an R1 zoning category, again, that would fit in the future land use designation of low-density residential, basically up to 4 units an acre. So you would think you can just throw it in the sock drawer with all the other socks, assuming all the socks are low-density residential type of residential uses, and it should be compatible and consistent, correct? Well, again, that's where your discretion comes in. It may or may not fit in with the surrounding area, and that's why we have boards like this to make those judgment calls.
I feel better with the different colors.
Okay, moving into the quasi-judicial hearings and the types of evidence that are deemed to be competent substantial evidence. The professional staff reports that you get can be relied on and are deemed to be competent substantial evidence. Testimony by the zoning officials and staff, zoning staff are competent substantial evidence. Expert witnesses, you can rely on that as well. They have to have specific knowledge of the subject matter, but there's no exact definition to determine who is an expert witness. That is something in your discretion to determine and give weight to their evidence accordingly. Citizen testimony, fact-based testimony is permissible and could constitute competent substantial evidence, but the mere generalized statements of we don't particularly like this in our area is to be disregarded. Legal argument of attorney is just that. It's legal argument. It's not to be deemed as evidence or testimony. And with that, do you have any questions? Well, I thank you for your attention, and thank you for your service and good work.
Thank you, Paul.
You too. Item number 4, Seminole County Codes and Processes by Mary Moskowitz.
Double duty here, so.
I had some tall people before me here. So good evening again, Mary Moskowitz, Planning and Development Manager. So today I want to go over kind of who we are and what we do in Development Services. Development Services Department of Seminole County is made up of 2 divisions. We have a building division, which I'm sure you guys are all pretty familiar with if you've ever had to pull a building permit. They also do our inspections for us. We are in the Planning and Development Division, and our division is actually made up of separate teams. We have our long-range planning team, and you may see some of those planners every once in a while. They're charged with reviewing the comprehensive plan of projects to be in compliance with the comprehensive plan. They also do a lot of the text amendments, and then any special projects. You know, we recently did the airport rezoning ordinance, so that was our long-range planning team that headed that up, and also the EAR amendments would go through long-range planning. Our current planning team, you guys are all familiar with them, Joy, Annie, Doug. That's our site plans, rezones, and land use amendments. The zoning team, you all probably haven't seen them as much. They are the team that reports to our Board of Adjustment. So as Paul alluded to earlier, we have two land use boards here in Seminole County, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then our Board of Adjustment. So the zoning team handles the variances for them, and they are also charged with processing our special exceptions, which are now being heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission, so you may see some of them more in the future as well. We also are the administrative staff for code enforcement. So Seminole County has what we call a memorandum of understanding with the Sheriff's Department. So the Sheriff's Department actually supplies the code enforcement officers, which is really nice because they have, the official uniform and, they look much scarier than I do. But then we do all the administrative work for them. And then the interpretation of the code falls upon the planning manager, which is me at the time right now, and so I will get calls from the code enforcement officers. Can you give me an interpretation? Is this use a permitted use? Those types of things. And then the other team we have is our central intake and our administrative team, and that's kind of really our frontline people, the people that you see when you first come in, you're handing your applications to, and of course people like Stacia who handle our clerking. So we really can't do what we do without them. So thank you, Stacia. You all, so who are you? You guys are the Planning and Zoning Commission, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and they are established in our Land Development Code in Chapter 30. What you may not be aware of is you also act as our local planning agency. So a local planning agency is something that is established in Florida statutes, and so we have decided through Chapter 7 in our Land Development Code that our Planning and Zoning Commission will also act as our local planning agency. So when you are making recommendations on things like rezones or special exceptions, you are acting as the Planning and Zoning Commission. When you're making action on our comprehensive plan, so our text amendments or future land use amendments, you are acting as the local planning agency. So I think Paul kind of summarized this a lot in his discussion, but I just want to make sure one more time because it doesn't hurt. The future land use, what that is, that's the what type of development can happen. So those policies that we're looking at, and then the land development code or the land development regulations with the zoning is the how of those developments. Those things, the physical things, the height, the setbacks, those types of things. So how do we get from an idea on paper to an actual development? We start with the pre-application and the development review committee. So the development committee is described in the Land Development Code and is made up of those technical staff members that deal with the anything that touches land development. So planning and zoning chairs that, the planning and development staff chairs that committee, but it's made up of other staff, including our development review engineers, our attorneys sit on that committee. We have fire, life safety, addressing, our natural resource officer. So really anything that's going to touch development, those are the ones who are going to be on that committee and reviewing those plans. So we've had, back when I started planning, we used to have paper plans, and people would bring in like 7 copies of a sheet of paper. That Mylar smell, you'd smell it. Yeah, Stephen, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. But now we do everything electronically, and so all of the plans are submitted electronically and are routed electronically, and even the comments are given electronically. So we don't really have any paper. Some residential permits, if somebody really, wants to give us some paper, we will take it, but most of the things we do now are done electronically.
Is the applicant included in the pre-application meeting?
That's an excellent question, yes. So what we do is we will send you the comments before the meeting, so you get all of your comments beforehand, and then you have that opportunity to decide whether, yes, I want to come meet with you all, or no, you just gave me a set of comments and I don't need to talk to anybody. So we will not hold a meeting unless the applicant is there. So. once the staff is reviewed and once it's gone through that DRC process, that's when it would come to the public hearing process. So DRC reviews many different types of development plans. The ones that you guys would see are the ones that are going to the public hearing, so, our comp plan amendments, rezones. So a major PD amendment, that's going to be something that's changing that plan development, maybe adding a new use or adding land to the plan development. So that is going to come back as a public hearing. We also do something called minor PD amendments. Those are essentially what they are, minor in nature. So maybe I might, say, change a small setback, an internal setback, and it's less than 10%, or some type of administrative change. Those types of things actually don't come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission and are done administratively. You guys are now hearing our special exceptions, and then you will be hearing very soon some more amendments to our land development code. So we have different types of actions with things we call the standard, or sometimes referred to as straight zoning actions. It's pretty straightforward. You come in, you submit the application, it goes through the review cycle, get your staff comments, you go to your Planning and Zoning Commission and your BCC hearing, and now your zoning rezone has been established. With our plan development rezone, we actually have a two-step process. So that first step is the step you all are familiar with that public hearing, and you're not just looking at not just the rezone, but that development order. So there's some actual text and maybe some additional provisions because this is a plan development. So that goes through the public hearing process. Then the PD is not completed, though, until a final development plan is approved. And that's really got more of that technical details in it. So you may all know, you see something come in, it says it's going to be commercial uses, and then we come in with the final development plan, and we know it's going to be the Starbucks and where the drive-through is and all of those things. So that level of detail doesn't, you guys may see it, and some developers know it's coming, so you may see that at a PD, but that level of detail is generally done at that final development plan, and it's just a staff review level. And you guys are probably really familiar with this one, but the preliminary subdivision plans, and that is actually something that is approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So you're looking at that technical data and making sure that it meets those technical requirements. Again, we begin with the pre-application, we look at the submittal, the sufficiency, and we get it through staff. This is just an example of those comments that we send out. Again, everything is electronic, so you will get this in an email, or you can go onto our system and look at your comments. And all of this information, and speaking of public record, all of this information is a public record, and so anybody can have access. If you guys want access to a plan, we can give you that information. So all of these documents, even though they are electronic, they still are subject to public record laws and are still available to the public for review. And then we get to go to the comment docs, and the applicant gets to look at them. They're so happy because everything says that it's met, and they're really happy, and they get to go to DRC. And at DRC meetings, we can either make people happy or sad. Generally, our goal is to make people happy, but again, we go through that review cycle, and if you have unmet comments, you will have to come back and get those met. And we try not to take things to a public hearing until at least all the comments have been satisfied. There are some cases where the applicant just says, no, we're not going to do that, we want to move forward, and we will move forward with a recommendation of denial, or that we can't approve it because the application is insufficient because it didn't provide that data that we're looking for. And then you guys are familiar with the PSP and coming here to the board. Just so you know, the PSPs are good for 2 years, but that's just the beginning of the process. You have to come in and get your final engineering plans, and then the plat is approved by the Board of County Commissioners. And that is on the consent agenda, so it is a item, the consent agenda is a tool that the BCC uses to approve lots of things all at once, but any item can be pulled for further public discussion on a consent agenda. I wanted to spend a little bit of time just so you guys know that administrative process of what goes in. You guys kind of see the end of the process, you know, the final, this is the public meeting, but how do we let people know the public meeting is happening? How do we get that information out there? So I wanted to go over kind of some of those things for you, just so you had an understanding of that. This first thing is now, in 2021, we started making it a requirement to have a community meeting. It used to be an optional provision, and we would recommend it to our applicants, but the commission recently adopted an ordinance that now it is required to have that community meeting. I will note that in Seminole County, the applicant is responsible for hosting the community meetings. So we as staff are not involved in any of those applicant-driven community meetings. They are required for anything that has a public hearing. We require them 20 days prior to that public meeting. So a lot of times, you know, some applicant, maybe I really want to come and do my public meeting, but if they haven't had their community meeting yet, we will not schedule them for that public hearing. We do require them to be held in a place that's open to the public and ADA accessible, so you can't just have it in your living room. It needs to be in a place that the public can go to. We are required to be notified of when the public meeting is being held, but staff is not required, and generally we do not attend the community meetings. As the planning manager, I have some ability to waive that. We do require the meetings to be held in person, but in some cases, I have allowed people to have those Zoom type meetings. So that is something on a case-by-case basis that the planning manager does have the ability to do. The requirement for the community meeting is that the applicant must provide us minutes and a sign-in sheet from that meeting. And those are generally, I think always, not generally, always included in your agenda packets. This is another thing that we updated, and some of you guys might have been on the board when we started talking about this. We updated our placard requirements, and so now we are now requiring 2 placards that are the 24 by 36. They have to be posted 15 days prior to the public hearing. And this is the information. Yeah. This is an affidavit. So what we do is we will have the applicants submit us, let us know that they did post that, and we ask them to send us a picture of that of that posting. And if they don't, we will not let them have the public hearing. But if somebody comes in and says, hey, the thing fell down, or in some cases, people may have taken the placard. Just because the placard is not there for 15 days doesn't mean that you can't have the public hearing. So just so you guys are aware of that. We also send courtesy notices. Again, this is something else that the board asked us to amend recently. We send them out 15 days prior to the public hearing, and I don't know if you guys can read that. We've really increased that boundary of where those notices can go. Minimum of 500 feet, can be up to 5,000 feet. The commission really wanted to make sure that people were getting notified of these public hearings. And then we also do an affidavit of mailing. So our clerk here does mail those notices out. We keep a record of all of the people who we sent the notices to. We do send them to the property owners, not to the residents. It's because that's the information that we have in the property appraiser. And there are some people that have their information as confidential. If that is the case, we do not send them a notice. So, there are some people that may not have gotten a notice, but we use the information that we have available to get those notices out. And it's not the only way we notice people. We also do a digital notice. We publish all of our upcoming hearings on Nextdoor. And we have worked with our community relations department, and they can do it within a 2-mile area of a neighborhood. So we identify a neighborhood and send out that notice on Nextdoor within the 2 miles of that. And then finally, everything is posted on our website too. So you can go to the website, go on those public meetings and select the meeting, get a copy of the agenda. So, we really want to make sure the public knows about what's happening. We try to get it out as many ways as we can. So we really want to make sure we're not, again, doing things in the shadows. We really take public notification seriously and really do try to get that information out there to people. Oh, yeah, look, in the newspaper. And this is what we are, so that all of the other stuff that's in the LDC, next door, that's just something we do, website, this is what we're required to do. And state statutes, we put that legal ad in the newspaper 15 days prior to the public meeting. And there's certain laws about the size and the type and the information that we must put in there. So we do follow the statutes as well. So beyond all of the stuff that we do as a courtesy, we also follow the statutes.
Because that's where everybody looks.
Yes. And I do want to note the importance of a quorum. So you are a 7-member board. We have to have a quorum to have a public meeting, which is 4 of you. That's why it's important. We need to know, let us know if you can't make it. It's important to show up because we really don't want to be canceling meetings if we do not have a quorum. So again, thank you for being here. And that concludes my presentation. So do you guys have any questions about, yes?
I do. So if one commissioner asks for any additional information about any of the cases, is it an automatic step to inform all the commissioners at the same time? Or I don't know if this ever comes up or not, but.
Yeah, so we do try to distribute the information as quickly as possible. So if we get an email or something like that, we do try to distribute that. It's easier with the BCC because there's more of a mechanism in place, but we do try to get that information. Generally, we will email that to you, when we get that. So if you had requested information, we will try to send it to all of the commissioners, just so they all have the same information at the meeting.
That's it. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Well, again, thank you for being here. That concludes my presentation. I think that's the end of the presentations here.
Well, thank you, Mary.
Yes, thank you.
Moving on to closing business. Mary, do you, the planning manager's report, do you have anything for the board?
I just for your information, and because it did happen, so there was an appeal of a planning and zoning commission for the PSP of the Yarborough Ranch. We actually received 2 separate appeals for that. They were both heard yesterday, and I wanted to let you know that the BCC upheld your decision to approve the Yarborough Ranch PSP. So I just wanted to share that information with you. I believe the other item, we still have not selected a vice chair. I don't know. We do not have a full committee yet, but that's up to you if you want to move forward with that. So.
Richard won't care. So we'll go ahead and move forward with the agenda and do the election of vice chair. Everyone agrees?
Sure.
All right. We're going to open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Dan.
I'll second the nomination.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other nominations? Hearing none, we'll close the floor for nominations. Is there discussion of Dan's qualities,
We don't.
qualifications?
Should I leave the
Or a
room?
motion?
Dan, would you like a say in this?
No, I mean, I appreciate the nomination. I'll do my best to live up to it.
Okay. Motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
I think you just got in my way.
There, any additional business to be heard, or the board have anything to discuss? Hearing none, we'll adjourn.